Two, one. Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. Happy Thursday. I hope that y'all are just as excited as we are to start another Power to Fly chat and learn, but also to make sure that we are hopefully rounding out the week for most of you on a really good high note. I'm really excited to get you introduced and get started with today's speaker. But before we do that, I just want to go over a couple quick housekeeping items for y'all. So what's going to happen is we want to make sure, in case you haven't joined us for a virtual event with Power to Fly before, we want to make sure that you know participation is key. We want to make sure that if you are one of our community members and you took time out of your day to be here and spend time with us, we want to make sure it's worth your while. So you are more than welcome to participate. You can do that in a couple different ways. You are always welcome to turn your cameras on if you'd like. No need to be Instagram perfect. Don't worry if you're coming from a non-traditional workspace, have furry coworkers, are rocking, I think, day 4 of dry shampoo. Please don't worry about it. Please feel free to come as you are. We are so happy to have you join us today. Now, like I did say, if you do want to turn cameras on, that's fine. If you would like to come off mute to ask a question of our speaker or add a comment, you are more than welcome to do so. However, just one thing to know is that if you do come off mute, you will show up on the live recording of today's session. So if you have any kind of privacy issues, not a big deal. You can still participate. Just don't come off mute. And you can always throw questions or comments you have into the group chat. You also have the opportunity to DM me if you would like to ask a question but be kept anonymous. Doesn't matter the reason, happy to do it for you. Now, like I said, today's session is being recorded. We're also live streaming it to our YouTube channel. I'll send you all the links for those in a little bit. But one thing to know about the recording that's really nice is that you don't have to feel like you need to take notes. Don't feel like you have to, worry if you didn't quite catch what someone said. You can always go back and do the recording. Now, in about 1 to 2 business days, everybody will be getting an email with a link to where they can rewatch this recording on our Power to Fly website. Now, that'll go out to everybody who registered, whether you showed up or not. Don't worry, future viewers, everything's cool. Or if you have to jump early or if you join us late, doesn't matter. Everybody gets this link. Now, that's going to go out in about 1 to 2 business days. But if Pavi has something to tell you that is, says something today that's just amazing, you cannot wait to share it with a friend or a relative or a coworker, you don't have to wait that long. Like I said, you can head over to our YouTube channel. We're live streaming there right now. But the other thing to know is that the recording will be posted there usually within about 5 to 15 minutes of the end of the stream. So just keep that in mind. If you hear something amazing and want to share it immediately, you can always go there. We also have a huge library of our back chats there that you can search. And subscribing to the YouTube channel is a really good way to make sure that you don't miss one of these sessions, even if you don't get a chance to register in advance. So I definitely recommend you check us out there. Subscribe if you'd like. You can also keep up with us on other social media channels. We are at Power to Fly on LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And we would love to share anything that you guys have going on. So please feel free to take photos and videos as we go if you'd like. Let your community and let your circle know that you are learning with Power to Fly today. We are always happy to reshare and retweet anything we're tagged in, just so we can keep growing the community, really spread these resources out to as many people as possible, and really provide this service to our community. Now, as we go into our next upcoming session, I just want to highlight that our speaker is here today on behalf of MongoDB. Now, I'm sending you a link in the chat thread to where you can check out MongoDB's company page on powertofly.com. Now, the screenshot that you're looking at now is what that dashboard is going to look like. I can tell you from looking at the live page right now, they actually have 404 roles posted with us, so about 20 more than the count that's on screen right now. But a couple things to know about this page are you can find out more about MongoDB as a company, learn more about their company culture, some of their benefits, all kinds of stuff like that. You can also check out events. That'll show you events that, recordings from past events that a MongoDB member has participated in, as well as links to upcoming events for MongoDB. So a really great resource, especially if you find that you would like to apply for something, and if you're prepping for an interview, it's a really good place to make sure come and kind of see what the company has going on so far. The other thing that I want to highlight here is that at the top of that screen of MongoDB's company page, there's going to be a pink box. It's going to be at the top right-hand corner, and it's going to ask if you want to join their follow network. Basically, what this does is it works like your friend at the company. It tells MongoDB that you are interested in working with them even before you fill out an application, but it also keeps you up to date when they post new roles. So it's a really, really nice way to make sure that you don't fall off of their radar and they don't fall off of your radar. It's also especially useful if you are maybe actively seeking, but don't see anything right now with MongoDB that was really like super suited for you. That way, you know what they've got coming up, and you can make sure that you get, you get to know right away when they've got new roles that are posted. So super excited to keep, kind of keep learning about MongoDB and get more information about that through Pavi. So let me introduce you to today's speaker. So Pavi is currently a lead engineer at MongoDB. She started with them as a new grad in 2017. After spending 4 years on the replication team solving complex distributed systems problems, Pavi brought those skills to another core component of the distributed database, which was the execution team, this time as a lead. Pavi's communication, mentorship, and project management skills have regularly been lauded by her peers and will continue to serve her well throughout her career at MongoDB. And we're so happy to have you join us today, Pavi.
Yeah, I'm really excited to be here and be a part of this conversation with y'all.
Oh, thank you. We're so excited to have you. Is there anything you'd like to add to this bio before we talk about what we're going to take away from today's conversation?
No, not really. I think I actually forgot to mention my pronouns, but they are she, her, hers. But yeah, besides that, all good.
Thank you for specifying. I should have asked, so thank you for that. All right, so before we dive into our questions, what you're seeing on the screen today is some of the principal themes that we're going to try and cover in today's conversation. Now, big things to know about this are we identified these areas by talking to Pavi and looking at the questions that you all submitted. But obviously, we won't be able to get to everyone's questions that were asked. So this is what we're going to try and cover. But like I said earlier, if you took time out of your day to be here for the live recording, we want that time spent to be well worth it. So if you have a question and you don't think it's going to fit in here, ask it. If you think, like, if you submitted a question and you're worried we might not get to it in time, ask it. You can come off mute to do that. If you want to, that's great. We just ask that you don't interrupt either Pavi or one of our other attendees. I get paid to fill the silence, so please feel free to interrupt me to get your question asked here. But like I said, you can also send it into the group chat in Zoom, or you can DM it to me. There's a ton of different ways to proceed. And it honestly, even if we do touch on your question, but maybe we're just not quite getting to the point of or understanding it the way you posed it, please feel free to give us give us additional context or ask a follow-up question. If you want to dive in deeper on something that Pavi's talking about, let us know. The best way to make sure that your question gets answered is to ask early and ask often. So please feel free to do that. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to try and talk about some areas, how to identify those areas that could use improvement, as well as some ways to approach tech dev projects holistically. We're going to talk a little bit about the soft skills that you need to successfully lead tech projects, especially when you are trying to maximize that impact from them, and some ways to ensure that your efforts aren't performative and make sure that you are continually actually making that solid impact. So to get us started here, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and jump over to our questions. So Pavi, the first question that we got, this person had asked or had said, changing your company's code seems like a huge challenge. Can you please share how you approach that project in a holistic way?
Yeah, great question. It was a huge challenge, but luckily, I think this is something that was actually a company-wide initiative. So in Jira, we have these things called like epics, which basically just means like a whole initiative that the company is going towards, either like in engineering or in another department. So I'm on the server team, so I was leading the server effort for this initiative, but there would be similar efforts on, let's say, like the cloud team or like our client drivers team, the education team, docs, like everything like that. I will say one of the main challenges that I ran into was the server project was the first one to sort of like start in this initiative. So there wasn't really like a precedent for how to lead that project, which I definitely found was a bit of a learning curve, just because I think we are a database like for developers, and we've been around for a while. So there was a lot of balancing between making sure we weren't breaking people's applications while also making sure that new developers and like new people coming, like actually also like existing customers were comfortable like using our technology. So I think as like the first person, or like one of the like leading one of the first projects in this initiative was definitely something that I worked together with my manager and also the product team to make sure I was really like servicing our end user, because at the end of the day, that's kind of how I see the projects in engineering. One of the more like tangible ways I feel like I did this was making sure that I documented all major decisions between product and engineering. So we have a bunch of like downstream teams that would be affected by any of the changes that the server team would make. So this required a lot of like constant communication with those downstream team leads to make sure that we weren't pushing something that either wasn't going to be used or would, kind of like break their testing infrastructure, like things like that. So a lot of it was just being really on top of the changes that I was proposing we make and to be like really intentional about which ones that we would prioritize for the upcoming release.
That sounds like a lot of balls in the air, like really juggling like a lot of things.
Yeah.
All right, so let's talk a little bit about some of the main blockers that you faced during this project. Can you share some of those with us?
Yeah, definitely. So I think like it goes back to, like coordinating with a lot of other engineering teams, especially. So sorry, to provide a little bit more context, this project I was leading started actually like April of 2020. So this was just when everyone was kind of figuring out how to work remotely, figuring out their own like work from home workflows and stuff. So a lot of the teams that I ended up working with were like very, very distributed. I couldn't assume that everyone was in the East Coast time zone. I generally am like based in New York, but I was interfacing a lot with engineers that were in California, the West Coast in general. So yeah, I think there was there was kind of a learning curve for me to make sure that we were having meetings that were productive, to be mindful of people's time. Because generally, another like context thing, like I started this project as an SE3, which is just kind of like a more junior engineer, and I was I was organizing conversations between like directors and like leads of other teams. So just trying to be like mindful of their time while also making sure that they understood the impact of this project. So I think like honestly one of the main blockers in the beginning was just like developing my own confidence, just making sure that like I was able to like reiterate how important this was to the company in general, and making sure people took me seriously, even with like the nature of the project. I think there's like a couple questions about this like later, but one of the things that I didn't want to fall into was this not being regarded with the same technical complexity or with the same like vigor as our other more, I would say like more flashy features that we would like generally present at like World and like things like that. But yeah, just a few of the challenges that I faced.
I honestly never even thought about that last part about like, trying to spend the same amount or get the same amount of focus on something that is maybe not as flashy and cool to talk about. Mm-hmm. So yeah, you're right. That's thank you so much for highlighting that, because it sounds like something that it seems simple, but then it's like, well, yeah, but in practicality, people want to work on the cool things. So
yeah, I mean, like you can think of it at like, it was a really massive tech debt project. Like that is what it was, and like no one likes doing tech debt projects in general. And like certainly, and like usually tech debt projects aren't as like impactful externally, I would say. Like a lot of tech debt projects, like the the benefit is much more internal because it's like easier to push better code if you like clean it up. But yeah, this one was kind of unique in the sense that like we were really trying to make sure we were doing the right thing, also like every step of the way, while also making sure that our code was like in a good state.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so when you talked about a lot of the blockers that you faced, and it was really great to get that kind of insight. A lot of people asked for tips about trying to get help or mentorship without making it sound like you're not capable of executing the task yourself. So obviously none of this stuff happens in a vacuum. You have other team members or other teams that you work with, but have you found a way to like handle this either in the past or maybe even just ways that don't work?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so this is also a really good question. I have been very fortunate, at least during my time at Mongo, to get really, really supportive managers, and just like my management chain in general has been like very supportive throughout my entire career. So I haven't really felt like I would come off as incapable if I went to them for help. And I encourage other people to hold their managers to the same standard. It's quite literally their job to make sure that you succeed. So if they're not helping you do that, that is, feedback that they should receive as your manager. But I think one thing that one thing that I like made sure to do is this kind of goes in line with like my documentation procedure, but I made sure to like document everything that I did. So and with a project kind of that spans so many engineering teams, this is kind of required. So I would like write down all the things that I did, write down all the questions that I had for each team, and I think like making sure that you have like very specific and intentional questions kind of helped it seem like I had actually thought about the problems, before like going to someone for help. Not that that's like a requirement, but I did want to show that like I was doing the work, and like it came at it more of like, I need these questions answered in order for me to be unblocked. So people should try to do their best to answer these questions. So I think it's kind of like a framing thing, it's like, hey, I did all this work, but there may be some gaps in either our like processes or like our ways of sharing knowledge like across teams that could like use a little bit of work. So I think in this area, leaning on your PMs, so we have like two PM positions at Mongo, like the project managers and the product managers. I had to interface with both, but the product managers sort of connect us to like the customer needs and make sure that like we're building what they actually want. Whereas the project managers sort of make sure everything is flowing properly across like an engineering initiative. So if I ever felt like I was like lacking information, or I felt it was a trend actually that I was lacking certain types of information, I would definitely escalate that to a project manager. And make sure that like I'm not kind of the one like running behind everyone, like trying to get them to do their like jobs basically. So yeah, I think it's a lot of figuring out like what types of information you need, and then going to the people that are sort of in charge of that workflow, and then like escalating it to them. I'm a huge believer in escalation. I don't actually think it's sustainable to do like everything yourself, but yeah.
No, I love that framing of it, because you're right. You take these questions to people and it feels weird, right? Because it feels like you don't want to say like, I can't do this thing that you assigned to me. Like you don't want to say that you can't do it. It's just like,
Mm-hmm.
well, you need some extra help.
Mm-hmm.
And you're right, like having those very like as specific as you can get them kind of framed questions does do that. It kind of shows that like, hey, I got to this point and this is where I was stuck. So here's what I did to that point, but can you help me get unstuck? Do I need to talk to somebody else? Or I love that. Okay. So when you are, if you're thinking about trying to spearhead these kinds of efforts, if people in the audience are thinking about spearheading these kinds of efforts at their own orgs, do you think that it's possible to really lead this kind of charge while you're trying to rise through the ranks? Or do you think that you can only really affect that change and have that impact once you've reached a higher position?
Yeah, also a good question. This is one of the main things that I was a little worried about, like undertaking this project when I was still in SE3, because at the time I was I was pretty focused on making sure that I was on track for like the senior engineer position. But this project actually got me promoted to senior engineer, and then was referenced again when I was considered for the lead position. So I think in my experience, it like given my one data point with like running this project, it certainly did help me rise through the ranks. And I definitely don't think it's only achievable like at a higher position. But I will say, getting like the buy-in did end up coming from like top down in my specific case. Like this was already an initiative that the company was thinking about. We've had a lot of like tickets filed like against our like Jira project, like questions that like our users and customers that were just like coming back to us. And finally, like we decided to, like actually do something about it. So there was already buy-in from like upper management before the project actually landed on me. But I think one thing that I like wanted to make sure specifically, and this is something that I talked about with my manager and also my like skip level manager, who is like the director of our team. I just wanted to make sure that there were enough technical challenges in this project to make sure that I like was servicing my senior engineer goals as well. Because I think when I joined, I've always been pretty confident in my my communication, like project management skills, like quote unquote like soft skills. I feel like they've served me for like most of my life, so I feel like pretty good about where they are at. But it was more like making sure my technical skills were up to par. So I didn't want to quote unquote be like a sacrificial lamb for like this project, which is like honestly kind of how I thought about it. I was like, oh, okay. So like to go to like, the woman of color, like all the like, I don't know if like I'm supposed to view it in like a certain way. But I was definitely assured that like that was not the case at all. And it ended up being actually like a pretty technically challenging project on its own. So yeah, I just think like the fact that I was promoted for this project was like, it gave me a really good feeling because I got to work on something that I did care about. And I do think I became a better leader and a better engineer for it. So all around positive experience. Thank you.
I love hearing that, because you're right. I mean, it is one of those things where it's not that you don't want it too early, like you want to have these kinds of opportunities in your career, but I think we all like, no matter how enthusiastic or how ambitious you are, everybody has a little bit of that understanding of like, oh, I might not be ready for that. You don't start acting classes on Thursday and think you're going to win an Oscar the next year. So
right.
I think it's very important, like you said, to kind of know your skills and know what you're good at. So that if you do get an opportunity like this, you can evaluate it and see not only like, is this something that you want to tie yourself to like in a professional capacity, but also like, what is this going to mean for you, either short term at this company or long term, what skills are you developing?
Yeah.
So yeah, I love
exactly.
that.
Yeah, I think especially like, so when I got this project, I had been at the company for like a little over, maybe like 2.5 years or something like that. So I think I was still very much in the mode of like, I don't want to say no to any opportunity because I'm like, yes, yeah, I can do that. Like, of course I could do that, especially when you're trying to like rise up in the ranks or like get to more senior position. I feel like you're always trying to say yes to everything. But this was the first time where I was I was really intentional about my yes. I was like, yes, but like, I want to make sure that there are opportunities for me to do this, this, and this so that I can make sure I'm on track for like the position that I want. So yeah, would definitely try to recommend that approach, like debriefing with a manager or like even just like a leader at the company that you trust, sort of to like give their unbiased opinion, I think would be helpful as well. And I think
Yeah.
affinity groups are really great for that. I definitely relied on a lot of my friends at UGT, and UGT is like stands for underrepresented genders in tech, and it's an affinity group for people at MongoDB. And I've definitely like leaned on them pretty hard for several situations in the past.
That's excellent. So when we're talking about things like you said, like kind of rising through the ranks, we had a lot of people that were basically like unsure about how to leverage the kind of projects like this for growth. One person especially said, "I would love to get involved with more impact-driven projects at my company, but I believe that those won't contribute to my seniority." Now, obviously, this might differ greatly from company to company or even team to team. But what has this been your experience that these impact driven, trying to pursue something that's impact driven may or may not really count in your favor when it comes to rising through the ranks?
Yeah, no, I definitely had these types of like these feelings like in the beginning of my project, just because like, again, the nature of a tech debt project, like it might not be super like technically challenging, although there is like a high reward at the end of it, but it's not like in the same it doesn't get a lot of the same like credit as like creating a new feature does, I feel like. So that was definitely a concern in the beginning of this project. I think like my biggest advice for this is like you have to create your own growth opportunities sometimes. And that's kind of what I did throughout like the whole project. I was like, okay, like I wrote this design, like, half of the design was like remove this code, or like refactor this code, which like didn't really require a lot of like super like technical skills from like my end. But what did, but so then I like kind of like reframed it or like thought of it as like, how can I make myself like more valuable to this project specifically? Because, they did trust it to me for, some reason. So I really made sure, especially with like the cross-team collaboration portions, to be a part of their design conversations as well. So like this project specifically had a lot of interaction with our client like drivers team. They usually like write the libraries that enable people to use MongoDB as a database. So, they're the ones that would be impacted most from like any sort of downstream changes from the server. Same with like the cloud team, actually. So I made myself indisposable to this project by learning everything I could about what their concerns were. So this involved like understanding protocols that like normal server engineers like usually don't get to like interact with. And this had like a double benefit of me now being the go-to person on my own team for questions about like drivers interactions or questions about like cloud interactions, because now I have like built this rapport of like knowledge that like I have about like these things. So I think that was like kind of a really cool side effect that I kind of created for myself, which I felt pretty proud of. But yeah, I think
you should. That's awesome.
Yeah. But yeah, no, I think I was definitely like, if you don't see the opportunity for your own growth yet, I would not say that it's like a completely closed door. I just think it requires like stepping a little bit more outside of your comfort zone. I do think it requires more like you would have to talk to, you kind of have to want to be a part of the conversations that may not include you in the beginning. Like I proactively like asked to be a part of like every single conversation that was going on about this project. I was like, I need to know everything that is going on in like for context so that I can make sure that I am like the point person for like any questions about this. So yeah, that's what I became. So
I love that. And I love, like you said, kind of taking whatever your specific opportunity is and finding a way to leverage it for your own growth. And you're right, sometimes it's stuff kind of going above and beyond, but if this is your career and you want to pursue advancement within it, what better thing to throw your effort towards than like precisely your goal. All right, so when you were kind of evaluating this project, how did pardon me, how did you measure success? What was going to be like that benchmark of like success or failure, if there was one? If not, then we can kind of address this in a different way.
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. I think like with projects like this, it's definitely hard. Like with general like tech debt projects, you can usually measure success by like how easily you're able to complete projects that like touch the same code in the future, like the amount of like build failures or like bugs that you are now generating from like the code. So there are certainly like those more like there are certainly like those metrics that are a little like harder like metrics, but I think like the other side of this actually is more of like the psychological impact, at least, that I feel like it has had on the server team. But also the server team is the one that I interact with most directly, so that's the one that I'll speak to. But I think like the fact that we dedicated like as many engineering resources like as we did to this project, the fact that we like dedicated the time to this project, and the fact that it was like called out in our all hands like by like like upper management and like our C-suite, I think just like set a very like positive but like firm tone like overall like in our like engineering department, which I thought was awesome. And I think you can kind of see subtle changes in how, like whether this means like how people conduct themselves in meetings, how people like conduct themselves when addressing other people, just being like more like respectful. Like not that like this was ever I've never felt like disrespected in my interactions like at MongoDB, but you can always tell when someone is like being intentional about making sure that like that a meeting it feels like psychologically safe, and I feel like a lot of the times like that onus is placed on not straight cis white men at the company, and it can get exhausting sometimes, quite frankly. But I feel like after this project I just started to see a lot more effort from everyone at the company to just be like better people, in general. Not that they weren't already good people, but now, it's just like being more active about it. So I think that was like one of the biggest, I think, impacts from this project, at least for me personally.
Yeah, absolutely. Like engendering that goodwill is huge. And I liked kind of the distinction you made between earlier between like the internal and external projects, right? Because one usually has a lot more focus on it, and especially since if it's coming, if there's external issues and that's why this, this fix needs to be implemented, or this problem needs to be resolved, there's usually some kind of metric, right? That's like, okay, this is where the disconnect is, or something that how you're going to measure whether or not this does well. But I feel like that maybe gets a little bit more murky when you're talking about an internal project, especially when you're trying to say like, okay, but is this impactful? Like, that's not a very concrete term. So do you have any suggestions on metrics that could be helpful to look at or to evaluate, to see if a project or certain tech is delivering that positive impact?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. I think a lot of this stuff is a little like harder to track specifically, because I feel like this would come out in a lot of like conversations between maybe like managers and their direct reports. Like, for example, like I don't know if like people actually know, but like the project was basically to remove instances of master slave terminology in our code base. This is a very like outdated form of like I don't know, like replication, and it like doesn't even like make sense with our like replication protocol, especially after we switched to replica sets, which use like primary, secondary terminology. So it was just like super outdated, like offensive, just like, but like we never got rid of it. So all of like our new features would still have to like accommodate this language, and like it just like didn't make sense. So certainly I think I even remember like when I first joined, like I would have to write a test that like I would have to call a variable like something like that I didn't want to call it because that's like the precedent, right? And like I always just thought it was really weird. But at the same time, like no one was like, it's a paradigm that has been like used a lot in like database theory. So it was kind of one of those things where I feel like a lot of people for a long time kind of just like turned a blind eye to it. Yeah, like in that sense, I do like one of the metrics I feel like that you could use is just I feel like you might need like maybe like a survey. I feel like in general, we got a lot of like positive feedback through like our employee, I forgot what it's called, like employee wellness surveys, basically like how do we feel like the company is doing about like X thing or, you know, whatever. But like a lot of those questions, like do have to do with like psychological safety and like asking like if people are comfortable, like, you know, voicing their thoughts, like feel comfortable like with their managers, like things like that. So I definitely think that this project had a positive impact there. But I do like, I wonder if like product would be a better team to ask about like the actual like in industry or like even to our like customers and stuff. Because I do know there are a few customers that did escalate like this problem to us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So when you're kind of we'll discuss it in terms of this project especially, but you know, when you are trying to get into the planning stages or trying to figure out, you know, like how are we going to tell if this works? I love your idea about the survey, because you're right, that would be, you know, especially for an internal project, that'd be a really great way to get feedback on it.
Mm-hmm.
Have you, you know, do you think that for other people running similar but, you know, but varied projects in their own orgs, would things like you know, like tracking like how many tickets get sent in about this versus you know how, you know, that kind of thing, do you think that looking at those measurable metrics and maybe trying to see how they could fit into impact, does that work, or is that kind of putting the cart before the horse?
No, I definitely think that works. Like sometimes a lot of projects will come out of like a need for it, you know, and like just sometimes I think a lot of it is timing, you know, like we were at like a good time to like take on this project and really be like, we're gonna not use this terminology anymore because it sucks. So yeah, like I think it goes in between like timing and also like answering like a very like direct need. And like, you know, that's often how like traditional tech debt projects work too. Like a lot of times they'll come out of like retrospective conversations, especially if you work it with like, you know, agile framework or whatever. So it's like people will complain about parts of the code that they don't like working on, and then you have to be like, why don't people like working on this part of the code, you know? And it could be a number of things. It could be like it's hard to understand for a new engineer. It's like it takes too long to, you know, debug. Like there's only one person on this team that like understands like what's going on here, so like things like that. So and a lot of those conversations end up in like, okay, so like let's modularize it, let's like get rid of it, like do we even need to support this behavior anymore, like, you know. So I think in that sense, like it would, I think like projects like these are a step in the right direction to make sure people are comfortable bringing out like this type of like tech debt versus just like a purely technical sense of like tech debt, you know, because I still think like it's like things like this are inhibiting to like, you know, an engineering experience. So yeah.
Okay, perfect. We do have a question from the chat. So y'all, we have about, let's see, 39, 40. We've got about 15 minutes left in today's session. We're going to hold some time at the end to talk a little bit more about MongoDB. But if you have a question, please feel free to submit it in the group chat. If you want to come off mute and ask it, that is great. I will absolutely encourage that. I'll hold some space after our next question for it. But please be sure that you get your questions in before time runs out for us today. Lindsay has written in the chat saying, I'm a tech bootcamp instructor. Do you have any advice for new incoming programmers, AKA their students, for what they can avoid or what to do to make sure they're following best practices and avoiding trouble areas like what you're describing? Do you have any thoughts for this person?
Sorry, could we clarify what the trouble areas are?
Hi,
Yeah,
yeah, I'm happy to come
go
off
right ahead,
mute
Lindsay.
too.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course.
Hello.
So just sort of thinking about, right, I'm crafting and working with people who are coming into this field and who
Mhm.
don't always recognize the different pieces. Sometimes things like master slave terminology is really, really obvious, but there's
Mhm.
other things I feel like that are a little bit more niche. Where should they be really common? And of course, my cat comes directly into my lap as
Yeah.
soon as I come off mute. Um, where should they be really focused on, and where should they? I've got a lot of people who are typically underrepresented people in tech, but they're also usually really hesitant about speaking up. And so, any
Oh, I see.
advice for someone who's coming in, how to be firm on some of these pieces and how to talk about these issues in terms of like, hey, this is actually really important and this is going to set our whole company up for success for wherever they end up after
Mhm.
my boot camp.
Yeah. No, okay. Now I understand. I think that's a great question. I think in general, I have always been a little like outspoken. So I am very like firm in like things that make me uncomfortable or like a little weird. But I'm trying to think of like how I got to this point in my life. But I think in general, like having a really good support system goes a long way for this. So I know that as like a coding boot camp instructor, like sort of like nurturing, I think a really supportive relationship amongst your students, I think goes a super long way. Like I was fortunate enough to like MongoDB, like new grads start in like a class of like 20 or so people. So it kind of felt like, after I graduated college, it was like another like, kind of college-y thing. But, at least for us, like the gender diversity was almost like a 50-50 parity, which was awesome. And like also like being based in New York, like a lot of, like our like political like opinions were aligned and stuff. So I felt very comfortable like going to them about problems that I saw at the company. And there was always like a looming factor of, are we too young, like are we too fresh to like even bring, like no, we don't, we've literally been working here for like 2 weeks and we're already like, actually like these are like weird things that you do and like they're not super great. But I think feeling empowered, at least in the beginning, a lot of people felt more empowered once they felt like they weren't the only ones thinking these things. So like for us, like we got together pretty regularly. Like if we would like write letters to upper management, we would like sign them like in a group. So there was no like it came more of as like a collective, if that makes sense. So I think like really trying to foster like that type of culture would go a long way, I believe. And it sort of comes like naturally. And then also like you as their instructor, just being like, just making sure that like, there's no like, there are no like, I forgot what the word is for this, but like, there's no repercussions for like voicing your thoughts like ever, and like, that's like a very strong like culture thing to set immediately, like in the beginning. But yeah, those are just like a couple of my thoughts.
That's a great question, Lindsay. Thank you. And there's a bunch of people in the chat chiming in, saying that they love your energy and your students are very lucky to have you in their corner. And absolutely, I can completely second that. So this hasn't happened to me, but my husband's an engineer and he's in aviation. So after he completed his, he got trained in the Army and then did a civilian certification for it. And once he got trained, he got a new job. Well, his first job was like asking him to do all kinds of like stuff that would basically violate a lot of like health and safety rules and stuff like that. And he was able to go back to his last instructor and be like, hey, I'm new into like the civilian world for this like industry. Is this normal? Am I like, being a big old scaredy cat because like they're not giving me a belt to go up on this cherry picker? And his instructor was like, no, that's not okay. Kind of gave him that check of like, because I mean, he graduates with all these people and those are his friends, but they're also new to the world. So yeah, I think that's absolutely invaluable to have that support around you, or people that you can go back to and kind of like toss out these ideas and say, hey, this is what I'm seeing and it's making me feel like this. Is this normal? Is this something that's an industry standard? Because, being in your own little either like silo or the fishbowl of your company can feel like this is reality, like, kind of shifts that for you. So I love that. Thank you both for addressing that issue. We do have another great question from the chat. Adewumi says, how do you ensure a good relationship between lead and junior engineers? Do you think that it comes naturally or not? And how important do you think applying for a talk in a meetup or a conference is when it comes to making impact in your tech career? So let's take these one at a time. Let's talk about having that good relationship between lead engineers and junior engineers. Do you think that comes naturally? And if so, or if not, if it doesn't come naturally, what should you be doing to foster that?
Yeah, so I can say, like, at least for me, like as a new lead, this relationship has actually come the easiest to me, just because like I started this company as a junior engineer. I kind of know what I went through when I was trying to become a senior engineer. So I feel like I'm very receptive to those challenges now as a lead. I think it doesn't always come naturally, for sure. I think sometimes it's easy to lose sight of how hard something was for you at the beginning of your career versus like now. And I feel like even now, sometimes I have to like check myself. I'm like, oh, okay. Like in my head, like when I'm making like estimates for things, I'll be like, yeah, this would probably take me like, X like weeks or whatever. And then I'll be like, well, actually like trying to figure out like if I had just started and like, if, I've never like written a technical design before, how, like, what do I actually like think it would take me? Like how often would I ask questions, like things like that. So sometimes it does take a little bit of reframing. But I think it's kind of like in a good way to kind of like recognize like how far you've come, and then just making sure you like lead with empathy then with like your junior engineers. At least in my experience, I've found that a lot of people when they're junior, they're like, kind of like sponges, very, very like eager to learn. So I think like the best thing that you could do as a manager is give them as many growth opportunities as possible. And even if this doesn't like, even if it's not something that they're totally confident in yet, I actually think that's a perfect learning opportunity, just because like you are there as their lead to like support them through it. Yeah, like I think it's like a really good confidence building thing. I feel like if you only ever do the things that you're good at, then you'll get like, it's a nice like confidence boost. But I think like one of the things of becoming like a more senior engineer is like the ability to dive deep in things that you don't really know, but like doing it well, and that's like a defining trait of that. So at least that's what I try to do when I think of my more junior direct reports.
I absolutely love that. All right, so the last part of his question was, or their question, I'm sorry, was how important do you think applying for talks, so like becoming a thought leader in the space or giving discussions at conferences, that kind of thing, how important do you think that is when it comes to making impact in your tech career?
Yeah, that's a really good question too. I think like at least when I first started, or also like in college and stuff, I would like go to a lot of these tech conferences, and then like listen to people talk and be like, wow, like I really want to like do that like someday. And like I was totally like for that career path. I would say I don't like I think I don't actively like seek out these opportunities, but like if something comes up and like it aligns with my interest, then I go for it. I think it would be beneficial to think of it even at like a micro level. Like you could be a thought leader like just on your team. You could be a thought leader like just at your company or like just in your affinity group. And it doesn't have to be like, like reaching like a super like like tens of thousands of like people or anything. But that's also a totally like reasonable goal, I think. But I don't think there's any difference in providing that same in providing your viewpoints to like a smaller set of people. I think it sort of comes with like your preference. I actually think it's easier to start at a more micro level. I think like a lot of my talks ended up being like conversations that I had with my fellow engineers or conversations that I had with people in the affinity groups that I'm a part of. And they like were interested in it, and they were like, hey, maybe you should give a talk about this. And I was like, yeah, I don't know, I think you're right. Like maybe this would be like beneficial to people like outside of the company. I think at MongoDB, I've been like pretty fortunate because we have like MongoDB World, which is kind of our like company run conference, and it's very, very like friendly for first time speakers. So I think that like has definitely helped me. And like we get a ton of attendees also. So I think it's like a really cool, like low stress way to get started. But there are also a ton of like conferences that are geared towards like beginners, especially like if it's your first time writing like a talk proposal, things like that. So I would definitely look there first if that's like something that you're interested in. Just because like, or like giving lightning talks, actually. That's how I got started. They're only like 10 to 15 minutes. So very easy to prep for. But also gets you in the mood for like public speaking in general, and to gauge if you even like it, you know, with not a requirement to like public speaking. So,
you know what, and that's a really good point. There's a lot of people that say things like that, right? Like, oh, you should go be a speaker, you should go do this. And that's not easy for a lot of people.
No, definitely.
So, yeah, like if that's something you want to do, but it still is scary, like, you know, like Pavi said, start on the micro level. Talk to a couple of your teammates first. Ask your manager if you guys can, you know, maybe do like a skill sharing day or something. Something that would give you a chance to strut, you know, a little bit of what you know, but not necessarily put you so much in the hot seat of trying to like create a whole set of programming or something. Yeah, I like that. Thank you so much for that, and thank you so much for the question coming out of the group chat. Very much appreciate that. All right, so we've got a couple more questions left, and I don't think we're going to be able to get to all of them. So let's see here. All right, let's talk about some of the main soft skills that you should foster as a tech leader or just as a contributor. Were there any, especially, you know, keen to hear if there were any soft skills that were really crucial or really pivotal to you succeeding with this project?
Yeah, I think the main one is definitely like communication. I just think like it was just any time that like I slacked a little bit on that, you know, like you could definitely feel the impact in the overall project. So I think that's something that I spent a lot of time making sure that I got right. Like this communication I think is like kind of broad, but like I think there are certain things like setting like finding the right balance between how often to check in with people without it being like inconvenient, or like, you know, while still being like mindful of their time, and also like running meetings in ways that like are most productive, because sometimes you can only find like a 15-minute window to like talk to 6 people or something, because just like there's schedules like never work out. So I think like being really proactive about like the questions that you need answered like in order to get unblocked was a skill that like I had to develop. And so yeah, like communication, I think I could go on and on about like different ways to, you know, improve your communication skills. But I also think as a tech lead, you also need to be able to identify when your team members are struggling. I think this is something that took me a very, very long time to understand, and like to also like how to fix it, you know, because I like if it's gotten to the point where like you're noticing one of your team members like struggle, they almost certainly know that they themselves are struggling, you know. So I think it's like how to approach this with a sense of empathy, while also making sure they're not like demotivated, you know. I think like that's a very, very difficult thing to do. But I think my main advice for that is like making sure this, like, it took me a long time to learn in my career too, but like really separating like feedback from any sort of like emotional response. I think like being as neutral as you can, or like, yeah, like as neutral as and objective as you can about feedback, and phrasing it as sort of like, hey, like I noticed like I noticed that we need to get like these things done to hit this deadline. Like, what can I do to make sure that you can hit this deadline? Like, do we need to reprioritize? Do we need to bring on another engineer? Do we need to talk to like someone else, like bring in another like expert in this like component of the code? Just being like really proactive in that way. And then also like recognizing that like even if this like growth opportunity didn't work at this point in their career, it does not mean that it will never work at any point in their career. So like, you know, I think it's kind of like a dance that you play as a manager. Sometimes you're like, oh, I think this person is ready for this growth opportunity, but it turns out they're not. And that's totally fine. It just means like there are some other skills that we need to develop before they can get this growth opportunity again. And then hopefully next time they smash it out of the park. So I think like just being really honest about that type of like feedback and learning how to deliver it took me some time, but I think I'm better at it now. Oh, Meg, I think you're muted.
See, I do this all the time, and this is my job, and I still forget the mute button. So don't forget, or don't feel bad if everybody still does this. Okay, so we have only 4 minutes left. I want to make sure we're able to get to the slide that I'm showing now. So these are questions that we asked of Pavi before today's session, and it's mostly about what it's like to work at MongoDB. Let's talk, since we don't have a ton of time, let's start with your top tips for someone who's interviewing. Are these tips for MongoDB interviews specifically, or do you think they're applicable, like, you know, across the board?
Yeah, so I've only ever worked at MongoDB, so this will be very specific to MongoDB, but I would assume that for any engineering position, actually, let's say if you want to work for a company similar to MongoDB, I assume that these tips would like go for those interviews as well. Because I think the main thing that people look for when they're interviewing people is like whether or not they want to work with that person. At least at MongoDB, like you are interviewed by like the engineers that would become your coworkers, like day-to-day coworkers. So I think it's really important to treat the interview as, at least what I try to do is like treat it as a technical conversation that you're having with like a coworker that day. So like treat it as if you would like solve any other bug, I think. I think this mindset really helps with nerves as well. Because if you're just like, oh, I'm like pair debugging this thing with this person that I like work with, it like takes a lot of like the interviewee interviewer like dynamic. Like as an interviewer, like I don't like when interviews go bad, like either, you know, it's like, it's a really like painful and uncomfortable experience for me as well. So
it's uncomfortable for everyone, like not just the person that's being interviewed, which can add to the pressure a lot of times.
Right, exactly. So like, I want to make sure the person is having like as smooth of an experience as possible, which I feel like a lot of people like don't consider. Like your interviewer wants to see you succeed in this interview. So like, definitely like ask questions about like anything and everything. There's no like asking too many questions or whatever. It's actually like a key thing that we look for, because the more questions you ask, the more I can tell like how you're actually thinking about the problem. And if like there's like a misalignment somewhere, I can like give you a hint that will actually get you like on track and stuff. I think the worst thing you can do is like not say anything. I think that's definitely like a much more difficult situation. But yeah, and then, you know, like this is like on top of just the regular, like study your technical like stuff, you know, like it's always going to be on there. But yeah, like I will also say, at least for like me personally, and I've seen this like across Mongo too, it's not a requirement that you get the question completely correct. We've definitely hired people that like have not gotten the question completely, but we could tell that like they were like, we liked their thought process. They were asking the right questions. And sometimes like you just don't finish. Like it's, you know, these interviews are like 45 minutes. It's not a lot of time. And we've definitely like rejected candidates that did like get the question correct, but you know, we like weren't super confident in like other areas of their skills. So yeah.
Great. Thank you so much for sharing this with us, Pavi. We are almost at time, so I just want to take a minute here to say thank you to Pavi. It's not just the hour that you see in front of you here. There is a lot of work behind the scenes that goes into this, and Pavi came in like beyond prepared and absolutely crushed this. So Pavi, thank you so much for the time that you've taken out of your day and for prepping for all of this. Thank you so much. It's been wonderful to spend the afternoon with you.
Yeah, thank you so much for being an awesome moderator. I really had a good time like going through this
Good.
Format.
Good. I'm glad you had a good time. And I also want to say a big thank you to our attendees as well. We had a lot of people asking amazing questions in the chat. We also had some great people watching on YouTube as well. So if you are tuning into us on our YouTube channel, hi, thank you so much. We love to see the streamers. So please feel free to join us there if you would like. But yeah, huge thank you to everybody that participated. This was a really amazing talk. It's sending me into my weekend on a really good note. So thank you to everyone for that. We are going to shut it down for today, but I just want to tell everybody and remind everybody, if you are new to Power to Fly, if today was your first event, we're so happy that you joined us, and we can't wait and really hope to see you again soon. If you are one of our frequent flyers and we see you all the time, that's awesome, and we can't wait to see you again. Have a really nice rest of your Thursday, everybody, and hopefully we'll see you sooner rather than later. Bye.